Welcome back. So far we've just laid a foundation, but today we're going to talk a bit about what game designers actually do. At its heart, our goal is to take a game and make it fun, or at least help it meet its design goals. But how do we actually do that? To talk about that, we'll start with an important paper called the MDA Framework. What is the MDA Framework? It's one of the few academic papers that's been widely read in the industry. Most professional game designers have encountered this at some point. It's actually very rare for an academic paper, but in this case the authors were already experienced game designers when it was read. So the paper is short, so it's a pretty easy read, and it's written to be of practical use for an audience of game designers, not academics. You can read it for yourself at the link shown here. I'll also give the link again at the end. It's called a framework because it's a set of conceptual tools to think about games, game design, and the relationship between the designer, the game, and the player. As for why it's called MDA, well, I'll get to that in a moment. So the paper itself is divided into two parts, the MDA framework itself, and then a discussion about kinds of fun. So first a bit about what games are and what game designers do, and then a bit about how to make games fun. So we'll start with MDA. This stands for Mechanics, Dynamics, Aesthetics, and is about different ways that a game is designed and experienced. The M stands for Mechanics. We've talked about what mechanics are in past modules. I defined it more or less as the ways that a game state can change. Sometimes it's used as a synonym for the rules of the game. Sometimes designers insist that rules and mechanics are related but separately, slightly different concepts. But at least at a basic level, we can think of the M in MDA as the mechanics as we've been thinking about them so far. So nothing new here yet. The D stands for Dynamics. We haven't mentioned this here, but you might have heard the term before. It was in common use in the field even before this paper. But here we get a better definition of what game dynamics are and how they're different from mechanics. Dynamics are what happened when the mechanics are set in motion. Dynamics are what actually happened to the mechanics during the play of the game. So you can think of the dynamics basically as play. What actually happens in the game while it's being played, that's dynamics. When game designers use this term, we usually talk about the overall patterns of play rather than a single case. So if you play a game and specific things happen, as you might write in a session report, those might not be dynamics. But things like overall strategies that can be repeated across multiple plays, or overall patterns like a shift from the opening game to mid-game to endgame in chess, or certain things that tend to happen like the game starting slow but finishing with a bang, those are dynamics. The A in MDA stands for aesthetics, which even the authors of the paper admit today is a terrible and unfortunate term because it was not in common use before and makes it sound like we're talking about the visual beauty or artistic composition of a game, and that is not what aesthetics means in the MDA paper. So from here on for the rest of your life, unfortunately, whenever you use the word aesthetics, you'll have to specify whether you mean in the visual sense or in the MDA framework sense. At any rate, they define aesthetics as what happens to the dynamics when experienced by the player. So this is how it feels to engage with the dynamics. So for example, this is where you'd say that a game is or isn't fun, or engaging, or boring, or whatever it feels like to play. And we'll get better terms to describe more clearly how a game feels in the second half of the MDA paper. So the player is here on this side, mostly engaging with the aesthetics. When you play a game moment to moment, as a player, when you're engaged, you're not thinking much about move, avoid, shoot. You're thinking, wow, this is fun, or whoa, watch out, that scared me, or something like that. But the game designer is over here. As designers, we don't create the dynamics or the aesthetics or the player, at least not directly. The only thing we have direct control over is the mechanics. So this is the flow of design. The designer creates the mechanics become dynamics when the game is set in motion and played, and those dynamics become aesthetics that are experienced by the player. And this is one reason designing good games is hard, because the designer is multiple steps removed from the player experience, and we can only change the experience by changing the mechanics and then seeing what effects those have indirectly. It's like having a remote control to remove a robot that's trying to fly a plane. You want the plane to go up, but you can't just command it to do that. You have to tell the robot to move its arms, and sometimes they move in ways you didn't expect, and it hits the self-destruct button and the whole thing blows up, and you have to figure out what you did wrong and try again. But there's something else to keep in mind here. While the designer is designing the game from the inside out, the player is experiencing from the outside in. If you see most people playing a game and having a good time, and then you ask why, their first immediate thought will just be, well, the game is fun, that's why. Over time, if they think about it, they might have a better understanding of the dynamics that are enjoyable to engage with, and eventually, as they become very familiar with the game, they might see the connection between their experience and the game's mechanics.
Obviously, they'll know the mechanics right away because they need to know that to play at all, but they don't really experience or appreciate the mechanics until much later. And asking a player why the designer created a certain mechanic at all, or in a certain way, would require a pretty deep understanding of the game from the player. Not something they'll have until they are very familiar with the game. But remember, a game designer has to be thinking about the player and the player experience. So as you design games, you need to be thinking in both of these directions. How do I create the mechanics that will give rise to the dynamics that will get felt by the aesthetics that I want the player to feel? But also, how is the player going to experience the aesthetics and then the dynamics and then the mechanics as they engage more deeply with the game? So this is another reason why game design is hard. Not only is there a big disconnect between the player and designer, but we have to be thinking in two directions. Let's take a practical example here so you can see how MDA would be applied on a real game. So let's talk about multiplayer deathmatch modes of any first-person shooter. Doom, Quake, Call of Duty, whatever you prefer. So a common mechanic, especially in older games, is to have fixed spawn points on the map. There are specific locations on the map that players can appear, and when they die, they reappear at another spawn point. So that's a mechanic in the game. When you first come in the game, and when you respawn after dying, you come into play at one of several fixed locations on the map. So if players know there are fixed spawn points on a map and they know where those points are, that means one possible strategy is just to hang out near a spawn point, and when someone appears there, shoot them in the back before they have time to respond. This is called spawn camping, and this is a dynamic that emerges from the mechanic of fixed spawn points. And if you've ever been in a game where you die, then reappear only to die immediately after, you'll recognize this is about the time you want to throw your controller through the screen. Getting spawn camped for most people is not particularly fun. Why isn't it fun? Well, losing usually isn't fun to begin with, but you also have no agency here, no control over the situation. As soon as you appear, you die, and there's not a lot you can do, so your choices don't matter. We'll go deeper into the importance of player choice and agency later on, but for now, just realize that the aesthetics are just how the game is experienced, and these aren't always positive. In this case, the mechanic of fixed spawn points leads to a frustrating aesthetic that makes players want to rage quit. So if you were designing a game like this and realizing there's this strategy that's just not much fun to play with because it's boring to just sit there and pick people off, and definitely not fun to play against because no one likes to die twice, you'd probably want to fix that so the game is less frustrating and more fun. How would you do that? You first have to notice this is a problem in the first place. You'd see that players are getting frustrated, that's the aesthetic, and then work backwards to notice they're specifically getting frustrated when they respawn and die immediately, that's the dynamic, and that the only reason that dynamic is possible is because it's a strategy that takes advantage of knowing where the opponents spawn, the mechanic. Once you understand that your only power as the game designer is to change the mechanic, there are a lot of ways you could approach this. For example, you might have many fixed spawn points in the map so that more than the number of players so that they can't all be covered, and always spawn a player as far away from the nearest other player as possible, so that spawn camping is impossible. Or you might make a player temporarily invincible when they spawn, maybe give them 3 seconds of being totally invulnerable, which would then make standing around a spawn point very dangerous for other players. Or you might have players spawn into a special protected area with multiple exits and good vision so they can see if anyone's camping, and if so, they could just leave by a different exit if they don't want to engage, and no one outside can enter their spawn zone. Or maybe have the player parachute in from above and have them choose where they drop so that they have more control over where they land. Or do away with fixed spawn points altogether and have them appear literally anywhere as long as it's not right in front of someone else. There are many possible solutions if you see this as a problem that needs fixing. And you could also just say, oh, this is the aesthetic I want, so I don't need to fix it. But it all comes down to finding a problem in the aesthetic layer and then working backwards to find out the root mechanical cause, and then changing that mechanic and seeing what effects it has. And you would find out your solution, if your solution worked, by playtesting, which might then show that you've got a different aesthetic that's equally undesirable for different reasons, and then you have to go back and fix something else. The second half of the MDA Framework paper talks about different types of aesthetics, specifically that there are 8 kinds of fun. Now, the first big takeaway here is that there's more than one kind of fun. I hinted at that in the last module, that fun was a word designers don't use often. This is why. Because fun is an overloaded term that means lots of different things, so it's more useful to talk about specific types of fun, rather than just fun as a general concept. Here are the 8 types of fun that they list in the MDA paper. The first type they talk about is sensation. They describe it as sense pleasure. In common use, we might call this eye candy. Anything that engages the senses. Cool graphics, awesome explosions, colorful particles, or just the fun of flying through the air. This doesn't have to be visual either. This would also include great music, fun sound effects, anything that you can feel like a well-timed controller rumble, or games that have haptic feedback where the controller pushes back. We don't usually have games that involve taste or smell, but you get the idea. There's a fun just in moving around a space and experiencing cool stuff while you're there. Sometimes in games we call this juiciness in the user interface, and we'll cover that specifically in a later module, but for now keep in mind that you can do this in any game. It doesn't have to have fancy graphics. Think about a game like Bejeweled or Candy Crush, where you can make multiple matches in this big combo cascade, and what actually happens on screen, each additional match has a musical riff that gets higher and higher and higher pitch, building up while bigger numbers show up on the screen and things explode in these big goo drops so that the whole thing is lighting up like fireworks, and at the end you have this voice coming in saying something like juicy or delicious. And even if the whole thing was an accident that you weren't trying for, you were just trying to make a single match and you got ridiculously lucky, it still feels pretty satisfying to watch. That's sensation. The next type they list is fantasy, the fun of make-believe. We do this all the time as kids. If you've ever played Floor is Lava, or pretended you were a hero, or astronaut, or pirate, or something, there's just something inherently fun in playing pretend. They talk about narrative, the fun of engaging with an embedded story. Some games are very story-heavy, and you might have encountered the occasional game where you didn't particularly love the mechanics, but you played through the game anyway because the story resonated with you and you wanted to see what happened next. The fourth type of fun mentioned in the paper is challenge. If you've ever played a game that was really hard, but you kept playing anyway because you really wanted to beat it, and then you did, and it felt awesome. There's a name for that emotion, by the way. It's called fiero, like the joy of overcoming a really difficult challenge. But sometimes there's even just a joy in taking on the challenge. Like, even if you feel blocked, that feeling of, let me try just one more time. Maybe this will be the time I get it. The entire Souls-like genre, named after Dark Souls, is like this. And in fact, you could say that historically, this is where a lot of video games started, because of how early arcade games had to be designed to get the player to lose in 3 minutes or less on average, as we discussed in the module on history. So there's definitely something that can be satisfying about just attempting something difficult. Next up is fellowship, the fun of playing with others. This is a focus on player-player interactions. Generally, we're talking positive ones, so collaboration, negotiation, cooperation, players working together towards a common goal. If you've played any co-op games or team games where your entire team just felt like a connection to each other, where that social connection was part of the fun, that's fellowship. Discovery. They call this games as uncharted territory. Here we're talking about exploring, uncovering hidden parts of a map, finding secrets, satisfying your curiosity by bringing the unknown into the known. Lots of games have you exploring on a map or exploring a space or a level, but exploration can also be things like exploring the crafting mechanics in Minecraft, or exploring a tech tree where uncovering some tech makes other tech visible, so it can be conceptual discovery in addition to exploring physical spaces. Expression, being able to express yourself in a game. So in games, this is generally talking about either games where you can mod them to create something new, or games where you can set things up to create your own fun situation. Think of setting up a big dramatic moment in The Sims, or creating a custom level in Super Mario Maker, using a level design tool to create a level that looks like a work of art if you look at it from above. This would also involve things like role-playing a character in order to create your own custom story. And last on this list is submission, by which they mean a game that becomes part of your daily or weekly routine and is now something of a hobby for you, something you can take pleasure in, partly for the ritual of returning to it again and again. Think of tabletop role-playing games where you meet with the same group every single week to continue a campaign. Lots of free-to-play games try to do this with things like daily login bonuses in order to convince players to make the game part of their daily life. When you incorporate the game into your routine, that's submission. Now, I should point out not to get too attached to these, because even the authors say this is not an authoritative or a complete list. In fact, there's nothing scientific about this list or how it was developed. The authors basically just pulled these from the air. And you could easily critique some of these. Fantasy and narrative are both so closely related, you could probably combine them to a single type. Submission feels more like the ongoing effect of having fun with the game rather than a kind of fun itself. And if you think hard, you can probably think of some activities that are fun but aren't represented on this list, so the list isn't even complete. So the big takeaway I want you to have from this isn't that there are these specific 8 kinds of fun, but rather that fun is an overloaded term. And there are many different kinds, and if you look online, you'll find all kinds of lists. There's one from Nicole Lazzaro on 4 keys to fun, article on Game Developer that lists 14 kinds of fun, and several academic papers with their own lists of different fun types. So don't take the list in the MDA Framework paper as a complete or perfect list, because it isn't. But do remember that the idea that there are different kinds of fun, and so when you're talking about your design goals, don't use the word fun itself because it's too broad. Talk about specific kinds. 2 other things to keep in mind. One is that games don't necessarily have to have just a single type of fun. They can offer multiple types. So while games are very pure representations, like chess is pretty much just about challenge and nothing else, so some games can be like that, but something like World of Warcraft or other MMOs have some elements of most of these kinds of fun in them somewhere. The other thing to keep in mind is that while we call these kinds of fun, that does not mean that everyone actually finds them fun. Challenge is a good example. Some people absolutely love games that are ridiculously difficult. Other people just find that rage-inducing. Whenever I ask a group of people who here finds chess fun, it's usually split about 50-50. Some people find it really fun, some people find it not fun at all. So what's going on? Is chess fun or not? Well, some people really like the kind of strategic thinking that chess offers, and others don't. And this is important. It means that for any kind of fun that you include in a game, some players will love it, and others will actually actively hate it and be repulsed by it. So if you were thinking before, like, aha, if all I have to do is make a game for everybody by just including all the kinds of fun in a single game, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. It's more a series of trade-offs. This also means if someone asks you, who is your game for? Who's your target audience? And you say, I'm making a game that will appeal to everyone. That's not the right answer. It means you haven't thought hard about this because that is just not possible. Any type of fun you include is going to attract some players and repel others. We can also ask, well, why is a particular thing a kind of fun in the first place? And I do have a theory here. Other designers like Noah Falstein and Ralph Koster have also said similar things, though I don't know if it's been scientifically validated or even if scientific study would even be possible for this. But my theory is something like this. Consider evolution. Ancient humans that had better survival skills and a greater chance of surviving, reproducing, and passing on their genes. So having traits that are favorable to surviving and reproducing would tend to proliferate, and traits that were likely to get you killed are less likely to stick around in the gene pool. So consider 3 cavemen, each having to go out and hunt food. The first caveman realizes that hunting is a dangerous activity that might end up with him being dinner, so he only hunts when it's absolutely necessary and stays in the safety of his cave the rest of the time. He's safe in his cave, but when he does have to hunt, he doesn't have a lot of experience, so he's very likely to die. The second caveman takes the opposite strategy. He realizes the first strategy doesn't work, so instead he wants to get tons of experience, so he goes out hunting very frequently and gets very, very good at it. Unfortunately, he's also putting himself at risk a lot, and eventually he's gonna get unlucky from one bad hunt and also gonna die. The third caveman, though, realizes that it's important to build hunting skills, but that it's best to improve these skills while you're in a safe place. So instead he practices. He throws spears at targets instead of at predators. He practices sprinting between 2 trees to build his running skill. He lifts heavy rocks to build muscle. And now when he hunts, he has a good chance of survival, but he can also hunt less often so that he's not always at risk. This third strategy is optimal and leads to the greatest chance of survival. Okay, so what gives the third caveman the incentive to build those skills? Well, how about if he actually finds those activities fun to do, just inherently on their own? What we're describing here fundamentally is play. And this is actually far older than humans. Many animals will play when they're young as well. It's instinctive. And most animal play activities, when you look at it, are exactly this. They're practicing adult skills like hunting, running, and fighting. And they practice this because they find it fun. But the reason we find it fun is because our brains make those activities enjoyable. If our brain makes those activities enjoyable, we'll do them a lot, voluntarily, and that means that we will get really good at them, which maximizes our chance for survival. Now, of course, evolution like this works very, very slowly, and the skills needed to survive in today's modern world are very different from back when we were living in caves, but the caveman part of our brain is still where we are evolutionarily speaking. And if you look at the kinds of things we tend to find fun, you'll see most of these seem like prehistoric human survival skills that help directly with survival or reproduction. In that context, a lot of these 8 kinds of fun are actually just, in the MDA Framework paper, are actually justifiable as things that our brain thinks will maximize our chance for surviving and reproducing. Sensation? That's body movement, building physical skills. Narrative? It's the ability to tell stories, to warn others about danger so they can avoid it, or tell others about food so they can seek it out. Fellowship? That's the ability to pool resources, work together to take down larger animals when hunting, get rescued when needing help. Also, the reproduction part of survival and reproduction kind of helps with other people. Discovery is expanding the territory that you know or control for the greater ability to find food, shelter, and protection. And if you can think of other ancient survival skills, that might suggest other kinds of fun that you could then base a game on. So that brings us to the end of another module. Here I'm including the link to the original MDA Framework paper, which again, you don't have to read for this class, but I would recommend reading through it at some point. Pretty much every game designer in the field has at some point. If you want to see more of one of the authors of the paper, Marc LeBlanc has been designing games for a few decades now, and he's run multiple workshops at places like the Game Developers Conference and other places, so he's got a bunch of writings, slides, and other presentations that are based on the MDA framework and other game design principles, and you could spend a few hours just poking around there if you want.
But for now, take your assessment so you can get your certification from HP Gaming Garage. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in next modules where we'll dive deeper into dynamics and aesthetics.